what is the history of Germany's support for Zionism, and I guess how that is shaped by the atrocities of the Holocaust, and how German citizens reckon with their government having committed one of the greatest crimes in the history of the world.
Right. So, I mean, the current policy of Staatsräson, which no one I mean, it's really a difficult policy to explain because it's a very abstract term. It's not a law. It's more something that's really symbolically felt. But like that goes back to Angela Merkel, the former chancellor of Germany, announcing in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament in 2008, that Israel's security is Germany's reason of state, as I said before. So this is like where this kind of post-war German national identity really made Israel be part of like the core of its self-understanding. I think that's where that grew from. Germany has also historically, in many ways, one could argue that Israel's, I mean, support for Israel and for Zionism has been kind of at the core of Germany's like making amends with its own history and like being accepted within the international community. And this goes way deeper historically speaking, but this would be a longer conversation, I think. But the main thing we're speaking about, the kind of like outright support for Israel's policies, really goes back to the 2008 speech. And in recent years, I think this has very much intensified and actually been became much stronger in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating because we've covered before how, for example, in Haiti, right, when there was the Haitian Revolution and the slavery ended, reparations were paid, but it was paid by the new government of Haiti to the former slave owners, the French, for their loss of capital and their losses of business. And I'm a little bit reminded of that story when I think about Germany's support for Israel, which is that this is a bit of outsourcing, I think, the crimes of a wealthy Western power with a ton of money and prestige. Germany still has incredible prominence financially on the world stage and in industry, healthcare, etc. Weapons as well. They're the second largest weapons sellers to Israel. It feels to me like another example of reparations for an incredibly horrific, bloody crime being outsourced onto people who are not deserving of that, and that is the Palestinians.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to look. It sounds reasonable what you're saying. You're more firm, I think, in the history of Haiti than I'm, but I do believe that like there is kind of an element of like a kind of a historical shortcut here that Germans. I'm German myself. I feel this historical responsibility that like I think every German should feel for the atrocity of the Holocaust. This is not something I want to deflect in any way, but I think there is kind of like a psychological, political sort of shortcut interplay here that we see more and more, that kind of support for Israel becomes this sort of like replacement or placeholder for actually thinking about what that historical responsibility could actually mean. You know, it's less, you know, how do we create a world that like that decreases anti-Semitism, racism, or ethno-nationalism, and rather kind of strengthens this type of like placeholder nationalism. But yeah, I think this one of the reasons why this kind of mindset is so baked in these days into international German identity is also that it's really pushed and cemented by several German newspapers. I think it's also really like a media crisis in which like in which the media has German state media, not state media, but several German media outlets have made kind of like support for Israel part of their editorial line, basically. So Axel Springer, which is like the biggest publisher in Europe and like one of the biggest publisher in Germany as well, and like owns the biggest newspapers in this country, has made it actually part of their work contracts to be pro-Zionist and pro-Israel. So that I think that's really a big part of the whole story that we're looking at here.
Can you talk about the repression of pro-Palestinian protests within Germany and what's been happening there?
Yeah, so the repression of the protest was very intense. Has been very intense in the first weeks following October 7th. So basically, any type of protest had been forbidden. Now the situation has changed. After a few weeks, protests have been allowed, and people are actually regularly protesting in Berlin. But there have been quite severe regulations on like people wearing keffiyehs, people shouting things like "from the river to the sea," which has been forbidden in Germany. People wearing symbols of Palestinian identity, like the Palestinian flags, has been forbidden in schools. There were all types of different forms of repression that took place all over the city, but very much particularly in Neukölln, which is, you know, very a lot of Palestinian refugees and people of Arab Palestinian descent live here in Neukölln. So it was very much visceral in this district, the kind of repression on not only pro-Palestinian protests, but also kind of like visible signs of Palestinian identity. And yeah, I think that has very much contributed to a sentiment of like, you know, racial profiling and feeling disenfranchised by major German society. And the sentiment right now is that like this mixture of kind of like you know, German anti-Semitism, you know, completely understandable for historical reasons, but like that politicized within the Israel-Palestine context, is really coming together with a kind of like new form of like anti-migration policies that is driven out of like a kind of prejudiced view of Palestinians as sort of like prototype neo-Nazis. That's the kind of sentiment that is being built in the public sphere in Germany, and like German chancellors Olaf Scholz has addressed the issue of like Palestinians in Germany having to adapt in a Spiegel interview, in which he also said like we are going to deport on a major scale. The vice chancellor of Germany has actually called on Muslims to you know, distance themselves from anti-Semitism, which, you know, understandable, but like he kind of cast Muslims as like sort of suspect of anti-Semitism per se.
Well, it's the complete conflation of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism.
That is quite visible in the discussions again and again, right? I mean, like it's often been conflated and mixed together, and there's not a lot of differentiation going on altogether.
Well, I really appreciate your time today, Hanno. Thank you so much for shedding light on what's happening in Germany and some of the sentiment there. You can read Hanno's work in The Intercept, in Haaretz. There are two recent pieces that we will link to wherever people are listening to or watching this. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much.